25. It was raining again the next morning. A slanting gray rain like a swung curtain of crystal beads. I got up feeling sluggish and tired and stood looking out of the windows, with a dark harsh taste of Sternwood still in my mouth. I was as empty of life as a scarecrow's pockets. I went out to the kitchenette and drank 2 cups of black coffee. You can have a hangover from other things than alcohol. I had one from women. Women made me sick. I shaved and showered and dressed and got my raincoat out and went downstairs. I looked out of the front door. Across the street, 100 feet up, a gray Plymouth sedan was parked. It was the same one that had tried to trail me around the day before, the same one that I had asked Eddie Mars about. There might be a cop in it. If a cop had that much time on his hands and wanted to waste it following me around, or it might be a smoothie in a detective business trying to get a nose full of somebody else's case in order to chisel away into it. Or it might be the Bishop of Bermuda disapproving of my nightlife. I went out back and got my convertible from the garage and drove it around front past the gray Plymouth. There was a small man in it alone. He started up after me. He worked better in the rain. He stayed close enough so that I couldn't make a short block and leave that before he entered it. And he stayed back far enough so that other cars were between us both most of the time. I drove down to the boulevard and parked in a lot next to my building and came out of there with my raincoat collar up and my hat brim low and the raindrops tapping icily at my face in between. The Plymouth was across the way at the fire plug. I walked down to the intersection and crossed with the green light and walked back, close to the edge of the sidewalk and the parked cars. The Plymouth hadn't moved. Nobody got out of it. I reached it and jerked open a door in the curbside. A small, bright-eyed man was pressed back into the corner behind the wheel. I stood and looked at him, the rain thumped on my back. His eyes blinked and behind the swirling smoke of cigarette. His hands tapped restlessly on the thin wheel. I said, "Can't you make your mind up?" He swallowed and a cigarette bopped between his lips. "I don't think I know you," he said in a tight little voice. "Marlowe's the name. The guy you've been trying to follow around for a couple of days." "I ain't following anybody, Doc." "This jalopy is. Maybe you can't control it. Have it your own way. I'm now going to eat breakfast in the coffee shop across the street. Orange juice, bacon and eggs, toast, honey, 3 or 4 cups of coffee and a toothpick. I am then going up to my office, which is on the 7th floor of the building right opposite you. If you have anything that's worrying you beyond endurance, drop up and chew it over. I'll only be oiling my machine gun." I left him blinking and walked away. 20 minutes later, I was airing the scrub woman's soirée d'amour out of my office and opening up a thick, rough envelope addressed in fine old-fashioned pointed handwriting. The envelope contained a brief formal note and a large mauve check for $500 payable to Philip Marlowe and signed Guy de Brissay Sternwood by Vincent Norris. That made it a nice morning. I was making out a bank slip when the buzzer told me somebody had entered my 2x4 reception room. It was the little man from the Plymouth. "Fine," I said. "Come in and shed your coat." He slipped past me carefully as he held the door, as carefully as though he feared I might plant a kick in his minute buttocks. We sat down and faced each other across the desk. He was a very small man, not more than 5'3", and would hardly weigh as much as a butcher's thumb. He had tight, brilliant eyes that wanted to look hard, and looked as hard as oysters on the half-shell. He wore a double-breasted dark gray suit that was too wide in the shoulders and had too much lapel. Over this open an Irish tweed coat with some badly worn spots. A lot of foulard tie bulged out and was rain-spotted above his crossed lapels. "Maybe you know me," he said. "I'm Henry Jones." I said I didn't know him. I pushed a flat tin of cigarettes at him. His small, neat fingers spread out like a trout taking a fly. He lit it with the desk lighter and waved his hand. "I've been around," he said. "Known the boys and such. Used to do a little liquor running down from Waimimi Point. A tough racket, brother. Riding the scout car with a gun in your lap and a weight on your hip that would choke a coal chute. Plenty of times we paid off 4 sets of law before we hit Beverly Hills. A rough racket. Terrible, I said. He leaned back and blew smoke at the ceiling from the small tight corner of his small tight mouth. Maybe you don't believe me, he said. Maybe I don't, I said, and maybe I do. And then again, maybe I haven't bothered to make my mind up. Just what is the build-up supposed to do to me? Nothing, he said tartly. You've been following me around for a couple of days, I said, like a fellow trying to pick up a girl and lacking the last inch of nerve. Maybe you're selling insurance. Maybe you knew a fellow called Joe Brady. That's a lot of maybes. But I have a lot of hand in my business. His eyes bulged and his lower lip almost fell in his lap. Christ! How'd you know that? He snapped. I'm psychic. Shake your business up and pour it. I haven't got all day. The brightness of his eyes almost disappeared between the suddenly narrowed lids. There was a silence. The rain pounded down on the flat tarred roof over the Madison House lobby below my windows. His eyes opened a little, shining again, and his voice was full of thought. I was trying to get a line on you, sure, he said. I've got something to sell, cheap, for a couple of C notes. How'd you tie me to Joe? I opened the letters and read it. It offered me a 6-month correspondence course in fingerprinting at a special professional discount. I dropped it into the wastebasket and looked at the little man again. Don't mind me, I was just guessing. You're not a cop. You don't belong to Eddie Ma's outfit. I asked him last night. I couldn't think of anybody else but Joe Brody's friend who would be that much interested in me. Geez, he said and licked his lower lip. His face had turned white as paper when I mentioned Eddie Ma's. His mouth drooped open and his cigarette hung to the corner of it by some magic, as if it had grown there. Ah, you're kidding me, he said at last, with the sort of smile the operating room sees. All right, I'm kidding you. I opened another letter. This one wanted to send me a daily newsletter from Washington. All inside stuff straight from the cookhouse. I suppose Agnes is loose, I added. Yeah, she sent me. You interested? Well, she is a blonde. Nuts. You made a crack when you were up there that night. The night Joe got squibbed off. Something about Brody must have known something good about the Sternwoods or he wouldn't have taken a chance on that picture he sent them. Uh-huh. So he had, what was it? That's what the $200 pays for. I dropped some more fan mail into the basket and lit myself a fresh cigarette. We gotta get out of town, he said. Agnes is a nice girl. You can't hold that stuff on her. It's not so easy for a dame to get by these days. She's too big for you, I said. She'll roll on you and smother you. That's kind of a dirty crack, brother, he said, with something that was near to dignity to make me stare at him. I said, you're right. I've been meeting the wrong kind of people lately. Let's cut out the gabble and get down to cases. What have you got for the money? Would you pay for it? If it does what? If it helps you find Rusty Reagan. I'm not looking for Rusty Reagan. Says you. Want to hear it or not? Go ahead and chirp. I'll pay for anything I use. 2C Notes buys a lot of information in my circle. Eddie Ma's had Reagan bumped off, he said calmly, and leaned back as if he had just been made vice president. I waved a hand in the direction of the door. I wouldn't even argue with you, I said. I wouldn't waste the oxygen. On your way, small size. He leaned across the desk, white lines on the corners of his mouth. He snubbed his cigarette out carefully, over and over again without looking at it. From behind the communicating door came the sound of typewriter clacking monotonously to the bell, to the shift, line after line. I'm not kidding, he said. Beat it. Don't bother me. I have work to do. No, you don't, he said sharply. I ain't that easy. I came here to speak my piece and I'm speaking it. I knew Rusty might smell. Not well enough to say, how's a boy? And he'd answer me or he wouldn't, according to how he felt. A nice guy though, I always liked him. He was sweet on a singer named Mona Grant. Then she changed her name to Mars. Rusty got sore and married a rich dame that hung around the joint like she couldn't sleep well at home. You know all about her. Tall, dark, enough looks for a derby winner, but the type that would put a lot of pressure on a guy, high-strung. Rusty wouldn't get along with her, but Jesus, he'd get along with her old man's dough, wouldn't he? That's what you think. This Reagan was a cockeyed sort of buzzard. He had long-range eyes. He was looking over into the next valley all the time. He wasn't scarcely around where he was. I don't think he gave a damn about dough. And coming from me, brother, that's a compliment. The little man wasn't so dumb after all. A 3 for a quarter grifter wouldn't even think such thoughts, much less know how to express them. I said, so he ran away. He started to run away, maybe, with this girl Mona. She wasn't living with Eddie Mars. Didn't like his racket, especially the said lines, like blackmail, bent cars, hideouts for hot boys from the east and so on. The talk was Reagan told Eddie one night, right out in the open. If he ever messed Mona up in any criminal rap, he'd be around to see him. Most of this is on the record, Harry, I said. You can't expect money for that. I'm coming to what isn't. So Reagan blew. I used to see him every afternoon in Vardy's, drinking Irish whiskey and staring at the wall. He don't talk much anymore. He'd give me a bet now and then, which was what I was there for, to pick up bets for Puss Walgreen. I thought he was in the insurance business. That's what it says on the door. I guess he'd sell you insurance at that, if you tramped on him. Well, about the middle of September, I don't see Reagan anymore. I don't notice it right away. You know how it is. A guy's there and you see him and then he ain't there and you don't not see him until something makes you think of it. What makes me think about it is I hear a guy say, laughing, Eddie Mars' woman lamed out with Rusty Reagan and Mars is acting like he was best man instead of being sore. So I tell Joe Brody, and Joe was smart, like hell he was. I said, not copper smart, but still smart. He's out for the dough. He gets to figuring could he get a line somehow on the 2 lovebirds. He could collect twice. Once for Eddie Mars and once for Reagan's wife. Joe knew the family a little. $5,000 worth, I said. He nicked them for that a while back. Yeah? Harry Jones looked mildly surprised. Agnes ought have told me that. There's a frail for you, always holding out. Well, Joe and me watch the papers and we don't see anything, so we know old Sternwood has a blanket on it. Then one day I see Lash Canino in Vardy's. Know him? I shook my head. There's a boy that is tough like some guy think they are tough. He does a job for Eddie Mars when Mars needs him, troubleshooting. He'd bump a guy off between drinks. When Mars don't need him, he don't go near him. And he don't stay in L.A. Well, it might be something and it might not. Maybe they got a line on Reagan and Mars has just been sitting back with a smile on his puss, waiting for the chance. Then again, it might be something else entirely. Anyway, I tell Joe and Joe gets on Camino's tail. He can tail. Me, I'm no good at it. I'm giving that one away. No charge. And Joe tails Canino out to the Sternwood place and Canino parks outside the estate and a car come up beside him with a girl in it. They talk for a while and Joe thinks the girl passes something over, like maybe dough. The girl beats it. It's Reagan's wife. Okay, she knows Canino and Canino knows Mars. So Joe figures Canino knows something about Reagan and is trying to squeeze a little on the side for himself. Canino blows and Joe loses him. End of Act 1. What does this Canino look like? Short, heavy-set, brown hair, brown eyes, and always wearing brown clothes and brown hat. Even wears a brown suede raincoat. Drives a brown coupe. Everything brown for Mr. Canino. Let's have Act 2, I said. Without some dough, that's all. I don't see $200 in it. Mrs. Reagan married an ex-bootlegger out of the joints. She'd know other people of his sort. She knows Eddie Mars well. If she thought anything had happened to Reagan, Eddie would be the very man she'd go to, and Camino might be the man Eddie would pick, handle the assignment. Is that all you have? Would you give the $200 to know where Eddie Mars' wife is? The little man asked calmly. He had all my attention now. I almost cracked the arm of my chair leaning on them. Even if she was alone, Harry Jones added in a soft, rather sinister tone, even if she never run away with Reagan at all and was being kept now about 40 miles from L.A. in a hideout, so the law would keep on thinking she had dusted with him. Would you pay $200 for that, Seamus? I licked my lips. They tasted dry and salty. I think I would, I said. Where? Agnes found her, he said grimly. Just by her lucky break. Saw her out riding and managed to tail her home. Agnes will tell you where that is when she's holding the money in her hand. I made a hard face at him. You could tell the coppers for nothing, Harry. They have some good records down at Central these days. If they killed you trying, they still have Agnes. Let 'em try, he said. I ain't so brittle. Agnes must have something I didn't notice. She's a grifter, Seamus. I'm a grifter. We're all grifters. So we sell each other out for a nickel. Okay. See, can you make me? He reached for another of my cigarettes, placed it neatly between his lips and lit it with a match the way I do myself, missing twice on his thumbnail and then using his foot. He puffed evenly and stared at me level-eyed. A funny little hard guy I could have thrown from home plate to second base. A small man in a big man's world. There was something I liked about him. I haven't pulled anything in here, he said steadily. I come in talking 2 C's, that's still the price. I come because I thought I'd get a take it or leave it. One right G to another. Now you're waving cops at me. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I said, you'll get the $200 for that information. I have to get the money myself first. He stood up and nodded and pulled his worn little Irish tweed coat tight around his chest. That's okay. After dark is better anyway. It's a leery job bucking guys like Eddie Mars, but a guy has to eat. The book's been pretty dull lately. I think the big boys have told Puss Walgreen to move on. Suppose you come over there to the office, Fullweather Building, Western and Santa Monica. 428 at the back. You bring the money, I'll take you to Agnes. Can't you tell me yourself? I've seen Agnes. I promised her, he said simply. He buttoned his overcoat, cocked his hat jauntily, nodded again and strolled to the door. He went out. His steps died along the hall. I went down to the bank and deposited my $500 check and drew out $200 in currency. I went upstairs again and sat in my chair thinking about Harry Jones and his story. It seemed a little too pat. It had the austere simplicity of fiction rather than the tangled woof of fact. Captain Gregory ought to have been able to find Mona Mars if she was that close to his beat. Supposing, that is, he had tried. I thought about it most of the day. Nobody came into the office. Nobody called me on the phone. It kept on raining.